through business, building relationships, and building Waterloo Region. 570 News proudly presents Business to Business. Here's your host, Glenn Pelletier.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is our second edition now of Business to Business on 570 News. And welcoming back to our great hosts who are always great to listen to. Tremendous dialogue and interaction. It's an educational process. It's highly entertaining. Welcome to Business. Our hosts, they're going to be regular guests. They are regular hosts. Ian McLean, Greater KW Chamber of Commerce President. Greg DeRocher, President of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. The show, as always, is being webcast simultaneously at 570news.com, and will be a podcast later, and we'll have rebroadcast of this show throughout the month of April. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Great to be here.
You got some special guests, very appropriate. Who have we got coming up today?
Well, we have John Malloy, of course, Minister of Colleges and Universities for the province of Ontario, going to give us some enlightening words on the provincial budget that came down.
Yeah, and he was at a chamber breakfast the day after the budget. Spoke to our chamber members, and some from Cambridge came up as well. So it was interesting to hear putting more flesh in the bones, because I think we both have said, devil's in the details in budgets, right? You get the top level numbers, but what it actually means for the community, for business, and what's going to come off the page is sometimes different than what you hear in the budget speech. So it'll be interesting to ask a few questions.
And if anything, we know that Mr. Malloy is, he's a man of his word. He said 2 weeks before the release of the budget that LRT would not be affected in any way, nor would the expansion of Cambridge Memorial Hospital, the funding for that. And sure enough, there were a number of hospital projects in the province that were scrapped. CMH was not one of them. That's good news for you and your folks in Cambridge.
Yeah, we're happy about that. I think it's been a long road to hoe to get that project on stream. It's been needed in the region. Hospitalization and healthcare in the region, is synonymous with business. It matters to everyone here, especially with the new format of healthcare in the province. So we were very relieved to hear
and we have, Waterloo City Council years ago, when I was on council, supported the call for the province to move on Cambridge Memorial Hospital, because we're all one region, right? Healthcare doesn't stop at the 401. So if Cambridge doesn't have the resources it needs, it affects Grand River and St. Mary's. So it's really important. That's why we both work on physician recruitment, because it is a business issue. When you're going to recruit and retain talent, you need to know that they've got healthcare when they need it. So.
And this area is a political battleground, very contentious, hard-fought area to win, so-called number of bellwether ridings. It would have been a political disaster for the McGuinty government to backtrack.
Well, I think that's absolutely fair, and it was good news that they did signal both those programs, Cambridge Memorial and the LRT were going to go move forward. We did have someone ask a question. I know it was Greg and I have been talking about this along with Lloyd Longfield from the Guelph Chamber is on Highway 7. And when's that expansion going to happen? So that'll be interesting. I think
maybe that's a question we should ask John. I think when he comes on.
Okay, so John's coming up. At first glance, gentlemen, what do you make of the provincial budget? I mean, Mr. McGuinty has, for all intents and purposes, managed to ingratiate himself with the business community, who are generally applauding much of what he has done. The freezing of corporate tax rates. He's being praised for taking, first of all, for including the business community in his so-called austerity budget.
I'm not. Yeah, I may beg to differ a little bit about that.
That's a double-edged sword, I think.
I think that there's a number of people who kind of look at it and say we were prepared to share the pain to get the deficit under control if the government demonstrated that it was making significant progress. I guess my view is we have such big problems in the province of Ontario. I'm not entirely sure this went deep enough. I don't know what you think about that.
I don't think so either. I think I was a little bit disappointed, because I think the forecast coming out certainly was that this is going to be a real tough budget. We're going to have massive cuts across the province. Of course, the Drummond report came out just weeks ahead of it, talking about 362 recommendations, and everybody was almost running for cover. And then what do we end up with? We end up with really a fairly soft budget.
Let me get this straight. Are you saying, Ian, and I don't know if Greg will join you in this, that you actually think he should have gone further in terms of corporate hitting up the corporate community? Because
No, not that. I think it was, the issue is what we have over a number of years and things like labor arbitration. I'm glad they started to say they're going to move in the labor arbitration system because that drives budgets municipally and across the province. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not supportive of the freeze on corporate tax cuts because I've been hearing from business that they're going to take a pause on making their own investments. I think what we were saying is in the spending is where the real work needs to be done to bring it into budget. Now, to be fair, they are moving on the labor arbitration file, which is great. They are saying that they're, if need be, going to legislate on wages over the next couple of years. But there are some things that I think could have moved further, such as what you've been talking about, Greg, the alternative delivery that Drummond Report talks about.
Absolutely. I think as well, Ian and I will both agree, Glenn, that with John Tory, who we had on a month ago, who said, adopt enough of the 362 recommendations, and then looking at corporate tax freeze is probably appropriate. I think what the government did here, that's an easy one because corporations aren't going to stand up and scream and holler and throw darts because they're recognizing that was a planned cut as opposed to anything else. So, businesses aren't going to stand up and rant and rave. Quite frankly, the businesses I talk to say they'd love to pay corporate taxes. Right now, they're not really making money to pay a substantial amount of corporate taxes. So, but I think it was an easy one for the government to do. I don't think that, and this may be, Ian, maybe you want to comment, maybe it's a minority government, it's going to be difficult to attack the real difficult one.
And I guess that is a question. I mean, I've been talking to people around. Everyone says, and I agree. I don't think anyone has an appetite for an election, but I'm wondering where the support's going to come from this. I mean, the Tories have clearly signaled that for a number of different reasons. Effectively, they said if you don't put all of Drummond in place, they're not going to support it. Maybe even done that before they saw the budget. So, but
everybody talks.
But the NDP are going to have real difficulties too. I mean, we're talking legislated wage freezes. So it'll be interesting.
I'm not sure how Ms. Horvath's going to be able to support this budget, given the fact that it talks about the public servant wages.
Well, we've got John coming on as House Leader as well as his other responsibilities. I hope for all our sake that the legislature can make itself work and move forward, because I don't think anyone does want an election. But I would have said before a week or 10 days ago that it was 5 or 10% chance. I think it's a lot more now.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Duncan refers to, quote, some thoughtful business people considering the corporate tax policy, quote, a wise choice. Mr. Hudak says a freeze on corporate taxes is nothing short of a tax hike on job creators. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the reality is business doesn't make decisions based on a one-year budget. These things have been signaled for a lot of years. And, I mean, I understand, things change and the environment changes in terms of the global economy, but business make their plans, in small and medium-sized business in particular, with a lot of thought and do it in advance. So when they see this changing, I think that also could dampen businesses' investment and therefore creation of jobs. All
right, we're going to come back with our first guest, John Malloy, Kitchener Centre MPP, and talk further about the provincial budget. You're listening to Business with Ian McLean, President of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and Greg DeRocher, Cambridge Chamber of Commerce President. We're coming back with more. This is Business to Business on 570 News.
We'll be right back with more Business to Business. The phone lines are open. Call in with your questions at star 570, 570-2545, or toll free at 1-800-570-5715. More of Business to Business right after this on 570 News. To Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
Welcome back to Business. I'm Glenn Pelletier. Our hosts, Ian McLean. He's the president of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Greg DeRocher, Cambridge Chamber of Commerce president. And we are talking in this first half hour of the show about the provincial budget. And we're pleased to be joined by our first guest, John Malloy, Kitchener Centre MPP, the former Minister of Training Colleges and Universities, now the Minister of Community and Social Services. Gentlemen, take it away. John, thanks for joining us.
No problem. Pleasure to be on.
Thanks, John. And as House Leader, you have a real challenge on your hands to see if you can get the budget through the House. But first, want to thank you. It was many of our members appreciate you always coming back right after the budget and speaking to a post-budget breakfast. I know we had some good questions about arbitration and the arbitration system. And I think there's a sense that many folks have said you're making some progress on the deficit, but did it go far enough? And I guess the question I maybe want to raise is the Drummond report had 362 recommendations, and I know not all of them were going to be put in this budget. But one of the calls was, what are the things that government is doing right now that it shouldn't be, and who in either the private sector or the not-for-profit sector should be doing those services so we can contain the size of government. Where does that fit in terms of this budget speech?
Well, I mean, listen, the Drummond report was a very important report. It was not the final word by any measure. I mean, the jokes about Premier Drummond and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we asked him to do a comprehensive review, and we took what we thought was the best advice. We wanted to come forward with a budget that was consistent with what we believe were Ontario values. And Mr. Drummond did yeoman service, but it was one piece of advice. We also consulted with Ontarians. We talked to the opposition. We put together a package. Now, you asked specifically about the private sector. The budget outlines a number of areas, such as Service Ontario, for example, where we see some partnerships with the private sector as a way of moving forward. We certainly want to look at different service delivery models, but at the same time, we recognize there are areas that are traditionally the responsibility of the government, and we're going to continue to deliver them. But it was a pretty major set of changes, I think, that we brought in last week.
Now you will be, I think part of what I saw was more dialogue about what some of those changes look like in terms of whether it's Service Ontario or other programs that not-for-profits or the private sector could deliver. Is that going to continue, and who's going to lead that discussion?
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to continue. Service Ontario is one where we see an increasing role for the private sector, and certainly I know every ministry has been charged with getting dollars, seeing how dollars can be stretched the furthest, and to see if there is a role for the private sector, the non-profit sector as we move forward. But I mean, as you point out, there are parts of the budget that are talking very much about sort of next steps. Listen, the big news out of the budget was compensation, and there, we were very clear. We respect the collective bargaining system. We're going to be going to the table and negotiating. We're calling on our partners. I mean, you've got to realize about 50 cents of every dollar is on salaries. So we're saying to our partners, look, we have to be realistic in this situation. We don't have money for basically for the types of increases that we've seen in the past. We want to negotiate in good faith. We have to take into account the very precarious position we're in. But if the negotiations fail, we are prepared to look at administrative or legislative means to impose a deal. So that's not something anyone wants to. Certainly wasn't said lightly, but at the same time, we want to tell people that we're serious about it. But just to go back to the original point, this is a first step. I think when we sit down with our partners, whether we're talking about teachers or doctors or other folks, that there's a recognition on both sides that this is a serious situation, and people are going to have to measure their requests accordingly.
John, it's Greg DeRocher, when you speak to other people, are you extending that freeze as well to potentially municipal employees?
Well, we have no direct control over municipal employees, but certainly in terms of the broader public service, I mean, there's really two pieces to the puzzle. One is that we negotiate directly, or, I mean, in the case of teachers, there's always been sort of this province-wide table. Obviously, the local boards are responsible for the individual contracts, but overall, we have a very direct relationship with, say, doctors, teachers, other public servants, and there, as I said, we're coming to the table to say we want to bargain in good faith, but quite frankly, folks, the Visa card has reached its limit. The second group is where we indirectly are involved with pay and salary and things like that, and that is, I'll give an example, a university or a college where they receive a significant level of funding from the provincial government. They in turn negotiate contracts with their employees. We are not directly involved in those negotiations, but at the same time, what we've said to our partners is, look, again, we've sort of reached the limit. We don't have the additional funds that we can give you to pay for increases in salaries and wages. So when you sit down at the bargaining table, although we're not at the table, we can't provide the type of additional resources that you might want. So presumably that's going to be tempering a lot of what goes on with other parts of the public service. In terms of municipalities, a little bit different because we don't have that relationship. But again, we are responsible for a fair amount of funding towards municipalities. And again, I think there's a general view that everybody's got to put some water in their wine when they sit down for negotiations.
But you are prepared to put through legislation in the end of the day if the negotiations fail.
Well, we're talking about direct negotiations that the province would be involved with.
Okay. You're listening to Business on 570 News. I'm Glenn Pelletier. Our hosts are Ian McLean, president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and Greg DeRocher. He's the president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. And our guest is John Malloy, the government House Leader and currently Minister of Community and Social Services with the McGuinty government. Back to you, Ian.
Yeah, John. I guess that makes even more important the line or some of the what was in the speech with respect to labor arbitration and the review that's going to go on in that, because that really does drive municipal budgets when you have essential services and a variety of others in the municipal sector. With arbitrators in Toronto telling local officials all over the province what they're going to pay, that really does drive salaries for the rest of your non-essential service employees. So, is the Minister of Labour leading that, and what sort of time frame? Because that's really going to be important if we're not legislating at the municipal level. Our changes in the arbitration system will be very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot of concerns have been voiced about arbitration. I've heard it from the Chamber as well. I guess the one observation I make is governments of all stripes have tried to reform, if I can use that word, the arbitration system without the success that maybe. I guess let me rephrase it. There's no simple answer. People often say, "Well, put in ability to pay." Well, guess what? Ability to pay is there. I mean, it's a tough one. So what we've said is, look, at a minimum, we want to make some changes to the system around timelines, around the responsibility of an arbitrator to put forward in writing the reasons why he or she came up with it based on the criteria that exist in the legislation, asking those parties that are making submissions to the arbitrator to, again, go back to the principles that underpin it. But what we've also said, and you've picked up on it, is that we want to have a consultation with everyone involved to say, how can we make the system more equitable? And I know we want to move as quickly as possible. I don't have precise timelines, but that would be the Minister of Labour who would be leading that. But listen, we've heard a lot of concern about arbitration. I'm not going to say that it's unwarranted, but at the same time, I'll go back to what I said earlier. If there was an easy answer, a magic wand, I think we would have found it before. So we've got to keep working away at it.
John, I want to certainly thank you and congratulate you. I'm sure it was all you that made sure that the large capital infrastructure projects were going to be maintained in the region, specifically speaking to the LRT and the Cambridge Memorial Hospital. But what about Highway 7? Highway 7, we've talked about that for 40, maybe longer than that, years. My understanding is, and I've heard the rumor, that Highway 7 is out. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by out. I mean, I'll tell you where we are with Highway 7. We've been proceeding with work. The EA was approved a number of years ago, which was time for great celebration. The Ministry of Transportation began the planning and began land acquisition. Both planning and land acquisition continues. At the time, the Minister of the day, and I was, part of the discussion, I'm certainly not denying it, had said, look, as we get our ducks in a row on Highway 7, we expect it'll be on the highway plan that comes out every year sooner rather than later. In the interim, it took a few years for us to get there in terms of planning, et cetera. In the interim, we saw a pretty devastating hit to our books, provincial books, and we've had to slow down everything in terms of new infrastructure coming on board. And certainly the last highway plan did not have Highway 7 on it, and the simple answer was that we're just not able to take on as many highway projects as we could in the past, as we want to. Certainly, I've talked to the Minister of Transportation. He's very aware of how important Highway 7 is. We also have the planning is going to continue, and what we're going to have to do is continue to push. And over the next number of years, we're going to have a new budget every year that will have more money for infrastructure, and at the same time, a highway plan. Just to explain to listeners, that's the way it happens. There's a budget allocation, and then I think it's usually in the summer that we see a highway plan comes forward of new highways that are going on the list. So as highways are completed, new ones come on the list, and we'll continue to push for Highway 7. But as I said at the breakfast, I think we all have to realize these are very, very tight circumstances, and we're not going to see the type of investment that we saw in the past in general. The government is reached a point where we're trying to turn a corner, and we're not going to have the type of huge investments that we saw in the last couple of years.
John, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John Malloy, Government House Leader and Minister of Community and Social Services for the province of Ontario. Coming back, we're going to switch gears, still with the theme of budget, and we're going to talk about the federal budget with our next guest, Gary Goodyear, Cambridge MP. You're listening to Business on 570 News with our hosts, Ian McLean, President of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and Greg DeRocher, his partner in crime, President of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. When we come back, we're going to talk as well about some of the events going on at both chambers, and we'll tell you about a very special accolade given the city of Cambridge. And we're talking about your earning the top spot in Ontario for quote-unquote active city.
Yes, we're very active.
We are going to talk more about that.
Except for Greg.
And a whole lot more on the other side. This is Business to Business on 570 News.
Business to Business, presented by 570 News. Watch the live video webcast at 570news.com. We'll return with more Business to Business, connecting community through business. Business to Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
Welcome back to Business on 570 News. Our hosts are Ian McLean, President of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, and Greg DeRocher. He's the President of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. And our next area of discussion, again, we're sticking with budgets, this time the federal budget. It came down on Thursday, and your next guest is a man who needs really no introduction in this community.
Well, Gary Goodyear, Minister of State for Science and Technology and for Federal Development Agency of Southern Ontario. So we're very pleased, Gary, to have you, and thank you for speaking to a chamber audience of regional business folks. Greg and I were pleased to listen to you on Friday afternoon. So thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Gary, this afternoon. I'm not sure I had heard from your staff that you were on an airport somewhere. Maybe you were.
I am.
Anyway, you'll probably recall we had a pre-budget meeting. Ian, actually, my colleague from Kitchener was at the pre-budget meeting at my offices, and around the table, you heard a lot of discussion about the SHRED program being streamlined and the Jenkins report, and a lot of them very concerned from both small business and from large business with respects to what changes are going to come down, recognizing that, and certainly from our perspective, we recognize, that there's been a lot of the use of this program to balance the books at the end of the year. But Maybe you can highlight a few of the points that are going to be taken out of the Jenkins report and some of those that maybe aren't.
Yeah, be happy to do that, Greg. And for listeners, the SHRED program is the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit. It ranges from about $3.5 billion to, I've seen it go above the $4 billion mark in support of businesses doing research and development. As you mentioned, Greg, and of course the Tom Jenkins report pointed out quite specifically, that sometimes it's used simply to collect a tax credit when the intent of the program is to push research and development, have businesses do more of that. And there were some recommendations made by Tom Jenkins. The most notable one would be to change the tax credit from labor-based and capital-based to simply labor-based. So we looked at that very carefully. You have to appreciate that we talked with hundreds and hundreds of businesses and consultants and experts. So what we've decided to do here, and before I get into that, let me tell you that every dollar that would be decreased from this program will be moved over into more direct help for businesses. So in terms of the entire envelope, this is just simply reallocation to make to get a better bang out of the intentions of the federal government for the taxpayer. So on the capital loss, I should just say that that's going to amount to about a $40 million decrease out of what is averaging about $4 billion. Mm-hmm. So not a big amount of money, and that money, as I said, will be moved into direct money. Getting very complicated is the prescribed proxy amount. Mm-hmm. This is where we sort of determine based on other costs that there may be an average of, well, let's just assign a 65% average. So firms will have the option of either claiming their actual expenses or go to the proxy number, which is better for them, whichever one is better. Mm-hmm. But we're going to decrease that, Greg, from 65 to 55%. Mm-hmm. The other one is on contracts. There is a notation up there if you're doing an arm's length versus a non-arm's length contract with somebody. Obviously, the research development tax credit is designed for research and development, not necessarily the profit margin inside a tax credit, inside a contract. So we're just changing that number to make it more specific. The final thing that we look like is a good idea is, Greg, as you know, we have reduced the corporate tax rate from 22% down to 15%. Mm-hmm. This actually now creates a relative increase in the value of the part of the SHRED. Yes. So what we're doing is we're simply offsetting that by decreasing the amount that you can claim from 20 to 15%.
Guys, let me ask you this: as chamber presidents, and Gerald, I'm curious to get your input on this. You guys talk a lot on this show about small business, the importance of small business to driving a local economy. Contained in the federal budget was a provision that small business owners will have the hiring credit extended by a year. How significant, from your perspective, gentlemen, is the extension of that tax credit, or would you have liked to have seen more?
No, I think that's a very welcome development of people that are thinking of hiring. That goes a long way, that $1,000 tax credit, and I do think, in terms of what Gary was just talking about, shift to commercialization and from of innovation to commercialization is welcome. Now, that's what business wants to see too. And I guess my question, Gary, is because you can get lost in those details, and that's sometimes the problem with these programs.
Yeah, that's right.
At the end of the day, is not part of this to simplify the program so that and where we hear is small and medium sized business may not know the programs exist, and if they do, it's too complicated for them, and they need professionals. Right. So is this not meant to try and simplify it so that a small, medium-sized business to improve whatever process they have so they can be more competitive and effective? Because that's what I think the Jenkins report was talking about, how to get more bang out of the bucks that are going in.
Ian, you hit the nail right on the head. What the federal government wants is we want our businesses to be able to access these programs for one reason, not to confuse them, not to give them more hoops to jump through, give them a hard time. We want them to use these programs to create growth in their businesses, which creates more jobs for Canadians, better jobs, better job opportunities, creates a globally competitive economy, and that is good for long-term prosperity and financial security. So I only talked about the SHRED credit program, the SHRED program. We are, just so you know, more than doubling the IRAP program, industrial research. Yeah. This is really good for smaller businesses and large ones. But on top of that, we have not completed the process, but this budget sets in place the initiation of decreasing the numbers of programs. There are over 60. We only talked about 2. There are over 60 government programs across 17 departments. And I can assure you that while the budget is talking about where we intend to go, it is the first of some necessary and reasonable steps to move towards less programs, less complications, less cost in the administration, but more incentives, effective incentives to create more jobs and long-term prosperity for Canada. And that's what we're beginning here. The budget itself actually has over $60 million to completely realign the National Research Council into an industrially facing, business-facing, demand-driven assistance for Canadian businesses to, as I said, create more jobs and growth.
You lead right into my next question, Gary, when you talk about streamlining government services. The plan also, the budget also outlined 19,200 jobs over the next 3 years are going to be eliminated. Positions, I suspect. The federal government now has about 500,000 employees. That's about 4%. I would have thought that that might have been a little more aggressive. My figures would have probably said you almost have 19,200 positions right now that aren't filled. You could just say we're not going to fill those, and well, and I guess because we all know how government works.
Well, that's one of the things that we always hear from businesses. Since 2008, and it's been a tough ride for everyone. They've had to already make these adjustments, and so I think they want to see. And the question is, did this go far enough? So I guess that's the real question.
Yeah. Well, this is, in my sense, I can be very clear. I think that we have achieved the perfect balance. We see around the world countries that have not gone far enough or acted fast enough, like the United States. We also see, gentlemen, folks that have gone too fast, cut too deeply, into like the United Kingdom. So the issue really for us is finding the reasonable balance, because as you know, the economy of Canada is doing extremely well, and it's doing well because we have taken a lot of time to consider our options. These are, in my view, these are substantial, responsible, necessary, and frankly, I believe they are perfectly balanced. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's not too fast, it's not too slow. And everybody has their opinion on what we could have done, but there is such a critical balance right now to the global economy, and this, I believe, achieves that perfect balance.
You're listening to Business on 570 News with our hosts, Greg DeRocher, Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and he's the president there, and Ian McLean, who's the president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Before you get to your next question, I want to, because we have him on the line.
I wanted to give a real tough question.
You know what? Hang on to that for a second, because remember the conversation we had about half an hour ago, just over half an hour ago before we went on the air. We were scratching our heads.
Yep.
We're having this great debate. Why would the federal government increase the tax exemption for stuff brought back from the United States?
Yeah, Ian's gonna.
You guys were all
hit Gary.
Well, we were talking about this, Gary, and I must admit, in the pre-budget consultation that we were in, and others that we were having at the chamber in Cambridge, I didn't hear much about it. So, the increase of, and if people aren't aware of this, I think in the legislation it's an increase. If you go over for 24 hours, you increase from $50 to $200 in tax-free, duty-free coming back. And if you're out for 4 days or more, it's $800 from $200.
Yeah.
And I guess some of the criticism of that, obviously we have small, medium-sized business, and we're close enough to the border in Cambridge and Kitchener-Waterloo that people can get to the border. Where did this come from? Is this part of a more of a free trade kind of thing, or where are we hearing this? Because the people that I've been listening to across the in the news reports from Michael Bradley and Sarnia and others are not very pleased and don't think this is going to help them or their retailers.
Yeah, Ian, when we looked at bringing forward the Economic Action Plan for 2012, it wasn't a separate entity. It wasn't an item onto its own. It built on a number of platforms. Since 2006, for example, we've been working on a strategic plan to make sure that Canada could survive the economic downturns of the world. We have the strongest employment growth in the G7. We are the number one place to do business. We have the fastest growing economy, not just this year, but next as well. I mean, and we have other countries that we work with, whether it's an aggressive free trades plan. As you know, we've signed agreements with 9 more countries for our businesses to sell their goods to. And without going into a lot more detail, I want to add in the government's desire to reduce unnecessary expenditures and find this correct balance. So altogether, we can look at individual parts of the budget, but it is a document that speaks as a whole and is a continuation of our plan for jobs and growth. This is the unique budget now that we do not see anywhere else in the world that also looks at long-term prosperity. Canada is the only country on the planet right now that can lift its head up and look now finally beyond the horizon because of how well we do. So whether it's losing the penny, where lots of people will be happy about, or this particular policy where some people think we maybe didn't need to do, or this policy we could have done more or less, I have to tell you that considerable hours went into, months literally, went into finding the exact treatment protocol, and all that was necessary to manage a full outcome of what ends up being a fair, moderate, and modest actions to create jobs and economic growth and return to a balanced budget through government reducing its own unnecessary expenditures.
Well, it's just going to put a lot more effort on the chambers to make sure that we do the shop local campaigns around Christmas time, I guess. But thanks for that explanation. The other thing that I wanted to ask you too, Gary, is, and you mentioned it the other morning at the Greater KW's luncheon when actually you were posed with a question. But, you know, we heard it immediately. In fact, I think the NDP leader came out of the House 2 minutes after Minister Flaherty rose to deliver the budget and started talking about the fact that in this document there was cuts to the transfer payments to the provinces, and of course Minister Flaherty and yourself, you said no, there isn't. We hear, you know, I guess, you know, I'm standing on the outside looking, and someone's lying, and you know, let's just speak straight about it. Someone's not telling the truth. There is either cuts to the transfer payments or there isn't cuts. So what is it?
Well, get those other guys, if you can, to call me a liar, because that would be a fun time, of course, because I'm here to tell you something very clearly. There are no cuts to the transfer payments for health or social programs like education or to people. And as I said in our meeting on Friday, you know, this is interesting way of that the NDP look at this. First of all, our transfer payments from the federal government are actually larger than what the provinces, some of the provinces themselves, intend to spend. We are, and you can write this down, increasing transfer payments to the provinces for health care. By 2020, we'll be somewhere around the neighborhood of $40 billion a year. Today, we're $27 billion. I don't know, but when I was in grade 2, that was an increase. So I'll tell you what we do know. The good news, I guess, about the NDP is they have decided to vote against the budget at least 20 minutes after it was tabled versus last year when it was 2 or 3 days before anybody knew what it had. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I have to be very strong on this. There are no cuts. This government under Stephen Harper has taken an entirely different approach to managing an economic downturn. The last time Canada faced a recession in the late 90s, nothing like this one. The Liberals of the time chose to cut health transfer payments. You know they gutted health care. We all remember that. They cut education. They cut science and technology. That caused a brain drain from our country and no doctors or few doctors in our areas. This Prime Minister has taken and consistently has taken a different approach, and that is increasing health care by 6% a year, increasing education transfers. We now supply over $10 billion for our students, either in infrastructure or direct. And this year, this budget, again, science and technology received over $1 billion for investments. That has never happened in our history. It is a different approach to managing a recession. And guess what? Canada is doing better than any other industrialized nation on the planet. And there's a reason for that. It's not magic, and it sure as heck isn't the NDP who vote no for everything.
Gary, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
Absolute pleasure.
That's Gary
Thank
Goodyear,
you, gentlemen.
Cambridge MP, also a Minister of State for Science and Technology, also responsible for the Federal Economic Development Agency. He's got the dual portfolio. We're going to come back and take after this break and talk about some of the things that are going on at both of your chambers. You've got a big day tomorrow, Ian, at your chamber.
Yes, we're very pleased. When we come back?
Yeah, when we come back,
sure.
You have another one of your luncheon series, and tell you what, you don't want to miss this one tomorrow. This is Business to Business on 570 News.
We'll be right back with more Business to Business. The phone lines are open. Call in with your questions at star 570, 570-2545, or toll free at 1-800-570-5715. More of Business to Business right after this on 570 News. Listening to Business to Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
Welcome back to Business on 570 News. It's a regular monthly program here on 570 News. This is the second edition, and our hosts, Greg DeRocher, he is the president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and Ian McLean, president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. And as always, there's lots to talk about in terms of goings on at both of your chambers, Ian.
Yeah, we're as you know, we're celebrating our 125th anniversary at the Greater KW Chamber, and one of our fourth event in a series of five through the course of this past year is happening tomorrow. Very pleased that the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, will be speaking to a crowd of almost 500 people. We're sold out, unfortunately, but apparently it's going to be on live streamed on the Bank of Canada website, so don't miss it. And I know we've got some of our friends from both the Guelph Chamber, 30 or 40 from the Guelph Chamber, as well as 30 or 40 from the Cambridge Chamber. So we're making this into a sort of a regional event. Very pleased to have him in the region. And Gregory will be there.
Yes, I will.
And should point out, we'll
have two chairs for you.
This is part of a regular luncheon series called the Point of View luncheon series. You've had
Frank McKenna.
On. You had Barry Verbanovic as a guest speaker, and this is something that's ongoing.
Yeah, we continue to bring bigger and better speakers between Greg and I, and the importance of this region, I think, is what it really boils down to. Is we're on the map both provincially and nationally as being a hotbed or a engine of economic growth. So that's why people are prepared to come and talk to the business community here.
Glenn and Ian, we have an incredible program coming up on May the 4th too. And Glenn, I want to make sure you're there because you're going to be inspired by this. We do.
This is very interesting. Go ahead. I know what this is.
I know. It's really amazing. Last year we got into it by accident. Chick-fil-A LeaderCast is an organization out of Atlanta, Georgia, brings together high-profile motivational and inspirational speakers and does a live via satellite transmission of this. And there will be 125,000 people worldwide tuned into watching this. And this year, the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, along with the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, are putting it on at Binghamton's. On May the 4th. You need to get your tickets by going to either one of the chambers for a limited time. There are some tickets being sold at a little bit of a reduced price at the Scotiabanks in Cambridge, Ontario. And what it's going to do is it's going to highlight, there's actually interactive participation with the participants that are there live in Atlanta as well. So it's really kind of a neat day. Everyone will just love it. There's Soledad O'Brien, CNN anchor and correspondent, of course, done some great stuff with CNN. Tim Tebow
Can hardly wait for that. That'll be interesting.
That's going to be really interesting.
There's going to the Jets now and everything else. And
I don't know whether he's going to
Denver.
be on a real high motivationally or whether there's.
Hey, he's only competing against Sanchez, so.
But incredible day that's going to highlight some incredible speakers going to talk about their stories and what we heard last year. And the reason why we brought Greater KW Chamber of Commerce on was each and every individual that left last year's presentation that we had just said it was. We even saw tears in the audience. We saw individuals who just came out of it all ready to take on the world.
It's a full day session. There's business leaders, and I think for business, you get leadership credit. Yep. So if you're an HR professional, you should be looking at this for your staff in terms of leadership development and business development marketing. So
it's May 4th. You can order tickets by going to either CambridgeChamber.com. That's CambridgeChamber.com or GreaterKW. Chamber.com.
Yep.
And is this unusual for two chambers like this from two different cities to work so closely together?
Well, it is odd when I have to partner with my friend Ian McLean.
Yeah.
No.
I know you guys find it difficult to get along.
Chambers do this. Chambers do this all the time.
And chambers are a network right across the province and the country. But I think what we figured out is that when we just talked about Cambridge Memorial Hospital, that's a regional thing. It's important.
It's one region.
It's one region. It's important to us all as business. Yeah. So one of the other things we're having in April, and I think this is with the growing of the green economy, biotech in this region, is our Energy and Environment Forum. It's our 25th anniversary. We've invited the Minister of Environment to speak, and we've got some great speakers and some new programs, and it's really focused on saving energy, saving money. So we're working with the hydro. So it's going to be a great half-day session, and I encourage everyone to come out because it can save business money, and that's really the bottom line.
Okay, and next up in your point of view luncheon series, have you got beyond Mr. Carney? Have you got
Mr. Carney? We actually have our wrap-up jubilee at the end of May 23rd. So, and we're hoping to have Rod Phillips, the new president of Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation.
Right, gentlemen. Thanks again for a delightful show, very informative.
Thank you, Glenn.
And we'll be back early May with another one, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, you've been listening to Business to Business on 570 News, hosted by the one and only. I can say these names simultaneously. They're both ones and onlys. Ian McLean, he's the president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and Greg DeRocher, president Chamber of Commerce for Cambridge. And thanks to Jordan Carbone for producing the show.
Thanks, Jordan.
Way to go.
News is next at 2. You've been listening to Business on 570 News.
Business to Business, presented by 570 News. Watch the live video webcast at 570news.com. We'll return with more Business to Business, connecting community through business.
Hi.